Richard sat in the doctor's office staring at the X-ray on the light board. The shadow on his abdomen was unmistakable. Even without medical training, he could see it didn't belong there. "How long?" he asked. Dr. Morrison shifted in his chair. 6 months, maybe a year with treatment. "I'm sorry, Richard." "Don't be sorry, just tell me what happens. Physically, I want to understand the process." The doctor looked uncomfortable. "The tumor will grow, it'll spread to other organs. Eventually your body won't be able to function. Your organs will shut down one by one. And my consciousness? When does that end? We don't really know. Brain activity can continue for several minutes after the heart stops, but at some point it ceases. The person is gone." Richard stood up and walked to the window. "The person is gone. That's an interesting way to put it. What exactly goes away?" "I'm not a philosopher, Richard. I'm a doctor. But you must have thoughts about it. You've seen people die. What disappears?" Dr. Morrison sighed. "The organized pattern, the body is still there. All the atoms are still there. But the organization that made those atoms into a functioning person, that's gone. So death is disorganization." "In a sense, yes." Richard turned from the window. "Then I'm not worried." "You're not worried about dying?" "I'm not worried about what happens to me afterward, because there won't be a me to worry about it. The atoms will still exist, the energy will still exist, they'll just be doing something else." Dr. Morrison didn't know what to say to that. Richard left the office and drove home. His wife, Gwyneth, was in the kitchen making lunch. "What did the doctor say?" she asked. "I'm dying? 6 months to a year?" She dropped the knife she was holding. It clattered on the cutting board. "Richard, don't joke about something like that." "I'm not joking. I have cancer. It's terminal." Gwyneth sat down heavily. Her face went pale. "There must be something they can do. Surgery, chemotherapy, something. There are treatments. They might buy some time, but the outcome is the same." "How can you be so calm?" "Because I've been thinking about death my whole life. Not in a morbid way, just trying to understand what it actually is. And I think I've figured it out. This isn't one of your physics problems, Richard. This is your life. My life is a physics problem. Everything is, and death is just part of the equation." She started crying. Richard held her, feeling the warmth of her body, the rhythm of her breathing. These sensations would end, but the atoms that created them would continue. They'd become part of something else. The cycle would go on. He found that thought strangely comforting. 3 days later, Richard's friend David came to visit. They sat in the backyard watching the sun set. "Gwyneth called me," David said. "Told me about the diagnosis. I'm sorry, Richard. Everyone keeps apologizing. It's not your fault I have cancer. Still, it's a terrible thing." "Is it?" "I've lived 58 years. That's more than most humans throughout history. I've had a good run." David shook his head. "I don't know how you can be so philosophical about it. What's the alternative? Be angry? Be afraid? Those emotions won't change anything. The tumor is growing, whether I'm scared or not, but don't you wonder what comes after? If there's anything, after I die." "You mean?" "Yes." Richard thought for a moment. "I know exactly what comes after. The atoms that make up my body will disperse. Some will become part of plants. Some will become part of soil. Some will evaporate into the atmosphere. Eventually, they'll be incorporated into new living things." "That's not what I meant. I mean your consciousness, your soul, if you want to call it that. Where does it go? Nowhere. It stops existing." "You really believe that?" "I don't believe it. I understand it. Consciousness is a pattern of neural activity. When the brain stops functioning, the pattern stops. There's no ghost in the machine. There's just the machine." David looked uncomfortable. "That sounds so bleak." "Why?" "The fact that a symphony ends doesn't make it less beautiful. The fact that a sunset fades doesn't make it less spectacular. Why should the fact that consciousness is temporary make it less meaningful?" "Because I want to believe there's more, that this isn't all there is. What you want to believe and what's true are different things." They sat in silence for a while. The sun touched the horizon, turning the sky orange and red. "Can I ask you something?" David said. "Are you scared?" "Are you scared?" "Of dying?" "No." "Of the process of dying?" "A little. I don't like pain, but the pain will end. And then I won't be able to dislike anything." "How do you know? How can you be sure there's nothing after?" "God, I can't be absolutely sure. But all the evidence points that way. Brain damage changes personality. Alzheimer's erodes memory and cognition. Anesthesia turns off consciousness completely. Everything we know about the mind suggests it's dependent on the physical brain. When the brain dies, the mind dies with it. But what about energy? Energy can't be created or destroyed, right? So the energy that makes up you has to go somewhere. Richard smiled. "That's a common misunderstanding. Yes, energy is conserved, but the energy in my body isn't me. It's just energy. When I die, that energy will disperse as heat. It'll warm the air around my body. Some will be used by bacteria as they decompose my cells. The energy continues, but the pattern that was me doesn't. So you're just a pattern? Everything is just a pattern. A wave in the ocean is a pattern. The wave passes, but the water remains. I'm a wave in the atoms of the universe. When the wave passes, the atoms remain." David stood up. "I should go. This is too heavy for me right now." "I understand. Thanks for coming." After David left, Richard sat alone in the darkening yard. He thought about patterns and waves and the temporary nature of all things. Was he sad that his pattern would end? A little, but mostly he felt grateful that the pattern had existed at all. A week later, one of Richard's graduate students came to his office. Her name was Maria, and she looked nervous. "Professor Feynman, can I talk to you about something personal?" "Of course, sit down." She sat, but didn't speak immediately. Finally, "I heard about your diagnosis. I'm sorry." "Thank you. I wanted to ask you something about death, about what you think happens." "Why are you asking me?" "I'm a physicist, not a priest, because you understand how the universe works. And I need to understand. My father died last year. I keep thinking about where he is now, if he still exists somewhere." Richard leaned back in his chair. "Do you want comfort or truth?" "Truth." "Then here's what I think. Your father doesn't exist anymore. The pattern of molecules and electrical signals that made him who he was has dissolved. The atoms that composed his body are being redistributed. They're becoming part of other things." Maria's eyes filled with tears. "That's horrible." "Is it? Those atoms existed before your father was born. They were part of stars, planets, other living things. They briefly came together in a pattern that was your father. Now they're moving on to new patterns. It's the cycle of existence. But his thoughts, his memories, his personality, all of that is just gone?" "Yes. Those things were patterns in his brain. When his brain stopped functioning, the patterns stopped. They can't exist without the physical substrate. So he's not in heaven? He's not watching over me?" "I don't think so. I think he's returned to the universe. His atoms are scattered. His energy is dispersed. The specific arrangement that was him no longer exists." Maria wiped her eyes. "How am I supposed to accept that?" "By understanding that it's not a tragedy. Your father existed for a brief moment in cosmic time. During that moment, he lived, loved, had experiences. The fact that it ended doesn't erase the fact that it happened. But I miss him." "Of course you do. Missing someone is natural. It's your brain's way of processing loss. But your grief doesn't mean he still exists somewhere. It just means he mattered to you while he was alive. Don't you believe in anything beyond the physical?" "I believe in what can be measured and tested. Everything else is speculation. And speculation isn't helpful when you're trying to understand reality." Maria stood up. "I thought talking to you would help, but I feel worse now. Give it time. Right now, you want a comforting lie, but eventually you'll find peace in the truth. The truth is that your father lived, and that was enough. It has to be enough, because it's all there is." She left without saying goodbye. Richard felt bad for making her cry, but he wouldn't lie to her. False hope was worse than honest acceptance. Richard spent the next month calculating, not physics problems, but something more personal. He wanted to know where his atoms would go after he died. He calculated the percentage that would become carbon dioxide exhaled by bacteria. He estimated how much would enter the water cycle. He traced probable paths for nitrogen, phosphorus, calcium. Gwyneth found him at his desk, surrounded by papers. "What are you working on?" she asked. "Tracking my future." "Your future? After I die?" "I'm calculating the most likely distribution of my atoms over the next 100 years. She looked at the papers. Complex equations filled every page. "Richard, this is morbid." "It's not morbid. It's fascinating. Did you know that within 50 years, atoms from my body will be in thousands of different organisms? Some will be in trees, some in insects, some in other humans." "Why does that matter?" "Because it means I don't really end. I transform. The specific pattern that is me will dissolve, but the components will continue. They'll become part of new patterns." "That's not the same as you continuing." "No, it's not, but it's something. It's the universe recycling its materials. Nothing is wasted. Everything serves a new purpose." Gwyneth sat down. "Do you really find comfort in that?" "I do. I won't exist, but the atoms that briefly formed me will go on to do other things. Some will help a tree grow. Some will become part of someone's brain, helping them think new thoughts. In a way, I'll be everywhere." "That sounds like you're trying to create a secular version of the afterlife." "Maybe I am. But this version is based on physics, not faith. The atoms will disperse. That's not speculation. That's thermodynamics. What about your thoughts, your memories, the things that make you you? Those will end. There are electromagnetic patterns in my brain. When my brain stops, the patterns stop. There's no backup, no soul that carries those patterns elsewhere. Doesn't that scare you?" Richard thought about it. "It would scare me if I'd still be around to experience the absence, but I won't. Once I'm dead, there won't be a me to feel scared or sad or anything else. The fear only exists now while I'm alive, and understanding the process helps reduce the fear. I don't think I can be that rational about it." "You don't have to be. Everyone processes death differently. This is just how I make sense of it." She picked up one of his calculation sheets. "You really think atoms from your body will be in other people?" "Statistically, yes. Within a few decades, through the carbon cycle and water cycle, atoms that are currently part of me will be incorporated into thousands of other organisms. It's inevitable." Gwyneth scattered his ashes in the Pacific Ocean. The calcium and phosphorus slowly dissolved into the water. Ocean currents distributed them. Some were absorbed by phytoplankton. Some settled on the ocean floor. The carbon dioxide from his cremation entered the atmosphere. Plants absorbed it during photosynthesis. Animals ate the plants. The carbon that had been part of Richard's body became part of thousands of other organisms. Within a year, atoms from his body were scattered across California. Within 5 years, some had crossed the Pacific. Within 20 years, they were distributed globally. A tree in Oregon incorporated some of his calcium into its wood. A child in Tokyo had a few of his carbon atoms in their cells. A fish in the Indian Ocean carried traces of his nitrogen. The pattern that was Richard Feynman was gone, but the atoms continued, just as he'd predicted. They became part of new patterns, new lives, new moments of consciousness. In his old office at Caltech, students still studied his equations. His books were still read. His ideas still influenced how people thought about physics. But those were just patterns too. Information encoded in paper and neurons. Someday those patterns would fade as well. The books would decay. The students who remembered him would die. Eventually, even his ideas would be superseded by new theories. Everything was temporary. Everything was just a brief organization of atoms and energy. And that was fine. It was how the universe worked, how it had always worked. Gwyneth lived another 20 years. She never remarried. People asked if she believed Richard was watching over her from somewhere. "No," she'd say. "He's not watching. He's everywhere and nowhere. Some of his atoms are probably in me now, recycled through the biosphere. That's enough. On her own deathbed, she thought about his last words. The atoms continue. They really did. Her atoms and his atoms, scattered and mixed with billions of others, all part of the endless cycle. She closed her eyes and let go. The pattern that was Gwyneth dissolved. The atoms continued. In a garden in California, a rose bush grew. Some of its carbon came from Richard. Some came from Gwyneth. Some came from people who died 1,000 years ago. The rose bloomed. It was red and beautiful. A woman picked it and brought it to her daughter. The daughter smelled the rose and smiled. Neither of them knew that atoms from two physicists were part of that flower. It didn't matter. The atoms served their purpose without anyone knowing their history. That was the universe. Atoms combining and recombining, patterns forming and dissolving, nothing permanent except the atoms themselves and the laws that govern them. Death wasn't the end, it was transformation. The specific pattern ended, but the components continued. Richard had understood this. He'd accepted it. He'd found peace in it. And in the end, that understanding was his only immortality. Not a soul in heaven, not a ghost watching over loved ones, just ideas in books and equations on blackboards and atoms dispersed through the biosphere. Just patterns briefly organized, then released back to the universe. It was enough. It had to be enough, because it was all there was.